She is wonderful, and I'm putting things to the side for us to double back to later so we can spend a moment talking to the host of Lights On. When it comes to election fraud, questions about the election that have to do with the Constitution, the constitutional lack of eligibility that Donald Trump had as a result of being connected to an overthrow of this country. I mean, that was adjudicated in a Colorado court. Our guest not only points to it, but really did the heavy lifting to try to bring more attention to it and continues to do that work on her podcast called Lights On. How about it for Jessica Denson, everybody?
Hey, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, feel the same way. So I am really curious to know about your work and how it's evolved since the early work you did on the 14th Amendment and Trump's eligibility when it came to the presidency. Now we're into his presidency, and he's working, and his people are working at an incredible pace. Things have really changed in America. Where are you, and where is your work most concentrated?
My goodness, it's an incredible evolution that I could have never prescribed for myself or envisioned. Forgive me for, I've been watching the floor proceedings in the House of Representatives. Have you been following the forced impeachment vote this morning?
I know that the articles were introduced, but I don't know that what's been the highlight of that so far.
We have been, you asked about my evolution from kind of 14th now, and what has happened most recently, which I introduced actually when you came on my show 2 weeks ago, was up, and it's unmuting. Just give me a second here.
Go ahead. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
One of these days I'll learn to mute things in the background. One of these days.
No problem.
Recently, I have formed this removal coalition. We've got about 10 organizations, grassroots organizations that are committed to this removal coalition, which serves to exist to amplify the removal demand of the protest and direct action space, to be explicit about our objectives, not just to be out there in the street saying we're not happy with the oligarchy, but to be very clear that our goal, our demand, is constitutional adherence, which means removing this illegal administration, not just for their violation of the 14th Amendment, which I champion and continue to from day one, but because they have committed a litany of constitutional violations, impeachable offenses since day one. So I formed this removal coalition. We have been working somewhat in concert with Al Green's office. He has been extraordinary in making commitments to this coalition of organizations that are committed to impeachment and following through on those commitments.
And Al Green is part of this, everything going on in the House right now, isn't that right?
Well, he is, as you know, Representative Al Green was the first most outspoken about intending to impeach Trump. One representative who actually came on my show introduced articles before he did, thanks to a grassroots effort, a grassroots pressure campaign from citizens on where their representatives stood on impeachment. This is the power of the people, folks. This is your power, okay? So one representative, in response to that pressure campaign, introduced his own articles. His name was Sri Tanadar. He promised on my show and subsequently on the floor of the House to invoke Rule 9, which is the rule that allows them to force a vote on articles of impeachment. He went to the floor to do that. 2 days later, or actually I think 1 day later, the leadership brought it to a vote and he chickened out. He chickened out not because of just his own self, but because the entire Democratic leadership bullied him into not forcing that vote. Can you imagine where we are with this authoritarian assault on American democracy, and Democrats are bullying their own members into not putting their names on the record as to where they stand.
Give me your take on that. I love that you mention it because it's so much a part of everything. Like the pushback isn't there on so many things. And I think, and I really want to hear your answer, but I just want to mention one other thing. The GOP is so good at pushback. They're so good at throwing sand in the gears of whatever the Democrats are trying to get done when the Democrats are in power. And yet the Democrats seem to just move along, play along.
It's unthinkable. Without disclosing confidential conversations, I mean, even the people that you have heard publicly over the past 24, 48, 72 hours since this illegal declaration of war on Iran say that Trump has committed impeachable defenses. These individuals do not appear willing to either bring their own or co-sponsor Al Green's. And I hope that changes very soon. Actually, let me just bring you up to speed because this is
Please.
incredible. I mean, we are literally living through history right in this moment, Mark. Al Green made a commitment at a rally I set up 2 weeks ago, or was part of setting up 2 weeks ago in DC, to our movement, that he would in fact force Rule 9. He wasn't going to be bullied out of it, not Representative Al Green. He brought a new article of impeachment today, thanked the coalition, announced it on the floor of the House, and invoked Rule 9. That vote just happened. It just happened literally moments before I came on the show with you. 79 out of that entire caucus of Democrats that constitutes almost half of that body, only 79 Democrats voted in favor of impeachment. But this is incredible. This is an incredibly important step because we are putting people on the record. We are taking names. This is the time for the constituents to get out there and be relentless, peaceful, but relentless with these individuals. What the hell are you doing in that office of public service to us if you are not willing to uphold your oath to the Constitution and vote to have this man removed from office? What the hell are you doing? So this was an incredible, it was obviously a failed vote, 79 voting against the motion to table. Of course, that's the first step. They always try to table the motion. But this is incredible that this movement has brought this to this point, and we're on this track now.
Is this just, in your judgment, kind of a political effort to warm relations with a president who seems so doggedly determined to destroy Democrats and Democratic states and cities, et cetera? Is that why these legislators don't come forward? Because if you had the same vote among the GOP to impeach Barack Obama, Joe Biden, et cetera, you'd have tremendous solidarity on the part of the GOP. Yet the Democrats just can't seem to steel themselves to vote against this guy that they say, I mean, the rhetoric is that he's such a danger to the country.
I don't even know, Mark. I
mean,
can't. It's very hard for me to put myself, with the way that I think logically and morally, to put myself in a mindset that would excuse this. I mean, are they operating out of fear? Possibly. I mean, I feel like I'm in the public space. There are a number of us who have very publicly put ourselves out there. I was having a conversation with a friend about how, I've really not talked about this publicly, but how before Trump was sworn in, I was making serious plans to leave the country before he was sworn in, because I thought I might need to do that for my personal safety. And I didn't do it. I stayed here, and I've been louder and more aggressive and active than I've ever been. Pretty much every day I'm more aggressive than I was the day before. And there is I find a sort of shield and protection in that activity, in that proactive stance. And these are individuals who have put themselves in public service. Nobody forced them to run for Congress. At least I don't think so. They chose to do this. They chose to be public representatives of the people. If they are now acting out of fear, capitulating to a tyrant in advance, out of fear for anything, whether it's fear for their personal safety or fear for his repercussions on their communities, and they can't grasp that they have the ability to take back the narrative and frame the conversation around his crimes and why he is a danger. I mean, this is what so frustrates me, is any kind of long game to say, let's wait till the midterms or wait till we get back power. How much damage is going to be done between now and the midterms? How many American citizens are going to be abducted off the streets by masked, unnamed agents? How much suffering does this country have to go through, and damage that is going to take decades, probably, if not generations, to reverse? Do we have to suffer before we're willing to stand up?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, you're right. And I agree with you on so much of what you say. And yet there is a whole world of thought within this country that is pretty rah-rah to this president, even as his approval ratings erode. and I know this because I travel as you do through red country, and sometimes I'm speaking with very learned people. Okay, these aren't, some backwoods hillbilly folks who haven't, read a paper or looked at a website or whatever. They're smart people, and their general view is it's usually around cultural issues, like it's the cultural wedge issues that carry the GOP in. And I think there are considerable misrepresentations when it comes to what they've suggested. The trans thing, for example, and these questions that affect fewer than 1% of the population, and yet it's enough to buoy support for the GOP to the point that they win office time and time again. So I guess what I'm getting at is, in a way, we have an echo chamber when we talk about, how long are we going to let this go on?
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It doesn't diminish my outrage. It doesn't diminish even the imperative, which is, I think, what you're talking about on the part of the Democrats to become involved and to be aggressive. But it is worth noting that there is a whole swath of the country that disagrees with us.
Yes. Well, that of course exists. And I think little by little, we wake these people up, and ultimately their own suffering. This is the real tragic part that I live firsthand, Mark, having come from that side. Ultimately,
yeah, your origin story is fascinating. Can you give everybody for 30 seconds? Most people know you, but those who might not.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
I was brainwashed by Fox News for basically the entirety of the Obama administration. That ultimately led me to work for Donald Trump in 2016. And I worked on his campaign and learned very much the hard way what a toxic, anti-American institution the whole Trump world is.
Was there a moment where you go, oh my God?
There were moments. I mean, in the campaign, there were moments where I realized that my conscience was very dangerous to them. Okay, having a moral compass was an extremely dangerous quality in the Trump campaign, and they tried to destroy me. And it took me a little later to make that all click and realize this was how Trump has been operating his whole life. But then they came after me for $1.5 million for exercising my First Amendment rights, and got an illegal $50,000 judgment against me, and tried to freeze my bank accounts, seize my assets, all of the above. I lived through that in Trump's first term. I was screaming from the rooftops in Trump's first term that he would come up after political opponents like dictators do in third world countries. And I just didn't get much airtime, but I lived this 8 years ago.
I mean, now you look like, it was prescient. I mean, although I think a lot of people were saying it, but you were living it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was living it. But anyway, just going back to, okay, there's millions of people. I don't think there's millions that actually put him over the edge in the election, but there's still millions of people, way too many, that support this guy. I don't want to say don't worry about them, but to a sense, look at our numbers and our support compared to theirs. I listened to a very apt analogy a few weeks ago. I think it was on MSNBC. Somebody was talking about the Tea Party and how effectively the Tea Party hijacked the Republican Party. Okay, they hijacked it. Their numbers, their protests were a drop in the bucket compared to the millions of people in the streets. What was it? Between 5 and 10 million people on No King's Day. I was at one of the protests. I was in Los Angeles. It was like a life-changing experience, Mark. I have never been in a crowd like that in my life. Peaceful, but unrelentless.
Yeah,
we had millions of people in the street, and the Democrats cannot harness that energy of millions of the majority of this country, of over 52% of people who support impeachment. Over 20% of even Republicans, Mark, are in favor of impeachment. And the Democrats don't have the political will or savvy or talent or initiative or anything to harness 5 to 10 million people in the streets on a weekly, almost whenever we call for a protest, there's millions of people in the street. You can't harness that energy to do what's right. I don't find it any.
I love that you mentioned the 20% of GOP voters, or those who voted for Trump, who've now come over to that side of actually wanting him out. Deborah May says, and then I want to talk to you about the audit in New York. Deborah May says there's enough evidence to impeach the creep 100 times. I will not have my president called a creep, please. I must have.
Don't talk to me that way.
Exactly. But without the votes, Deborah says, there isn't much we can be doing to limit his power. Take back Congress from him, pass bills, limit power. So Deborah's saying, hey, this is a good exercise, but the realities are grim in terms of votes. You just don't have the votes.
Okay, let me give you some
please.
numbers. You ready for some numbers, Deborah? 4 Republicans. That's how many you need to cross over. If you get the Democrats to start, acting with sanity, you only need 4 Republicans to cross over and vote to pass this out of the House. Okay, 4. 2 of those Republicans already voted to impeach Trump in the second impeachment, his last term. Okay, this is what is politics, Mark? What are we doing here today? What is anybody doing? It is the art of persuasion, right? Persuasion. We can change the conversation. This is what drives me nuts. Like, put these people on defense. You had Thomas Massey, Republican from Kentucky, calling for the War Powers Resolution with the support of people like AOC and Ro Khanna. He came out immediately and called these the declaration of war, the acts against Iran, unconstitutional. Use the power of persuasion. Don't write off. Don't seal your defeat before you've even tried. I mean, I know there's some really popular quotes from, that I'm missing about how people just invite defeat when it's literally by not even trying, not even putting forward the effort. The Senate's a bigger hurdle, admittedly. 2/3 is significant. But if we could start changing the conversation, and that's what I've tried to do with the Removal Coalition, change the conversation, have people have protests that are oriented about removal. So these representatives cannot ignore this pressure. So the media cannot ignore the narrative of what this country wants.
So much of this is about the media and what the conversation is, which is why what you're saying is truly significant. That if you can get the conversation to increasingly be about this, then you force into the news cycle a kind of back and forth that gets everybody thinking about it. So that's why it's worth doing, even though you may not prevail. As you say, I mean, if you couldn't pass the articles of impeachment for removal in the Senate after J6, I mean, it's going to be hard to do it in this situation, but that doesn't mean, for the reasons that we've said, it shouldn't be pursued. I want to quickly just touch on what's happening in this Rockland County Board of Elections suit. There is a legal case, and they vote. Essentially, it's this, and I'll just refer to this summary. According to the legal complaint, more voters have sworn in legal affidavits that they voted for independent U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sayre in the Rockland County Board of Elections and counting and certifying of ballots that contradicted those results. They cite numerous statistical anomalies in the presidential election results. This is, again, Rockland County in New York. They include multiple districts where hundreds of voters chose the Democratic candidate Kirsten Gillibrand for Senate, but none voted for former Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate for president. Again, it would seem odd that you would come out in such big numbers for Kirsten Gillibrand, but not be voting for top of ticket Kamala Harris. But the votes were not recorded for Kamala Harris. So there are many professors, and one is Max Bonamente, I think is how he says his name. He's a professor at the University of Alabama, and he's the author of The Statistics and the Analysis of Scientific Data. And he said that the presidential election results were statistically highly unlikely in 4 of the 5 towns in Rockland County compared with 2020 results. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. In other words, yet again, another flank of the argument that you've been making about the elections and about, perhaps the fraud associated with the election. And it may extend beyond that to data manipulation, et cetera. But here are the first signs of statistical anomalies being called out in court.
Yeah, this is ultimately, I think what a lot of these organizations who have been working to get audits have been pushing for, because all they want, I mean, all any of us wanted who were looking into this after the election, we weren't advocating for storming the Capitol, okay? We weren't having press conferences at Four Seasons Landscaping with hair dye dripping down our face, okay? We were just asking for recounts and audits. That's all. There is, I mean, this is what I, have learned. We were so gaslit. This is what people need to understand. We were so gaslit by Trump and his cabal and the 2020 conspirators in 2020 that we could never question election integrity again without being compared to them. That is some serious psyops. People need to understand the amount of psychological manipulation that is behind that and how dangerous it is. And that's why I think you and I identified it. It's why I left Midas Touch to have these conversations on my own and freely, and understood the urgency. And it's such an unthinkable thing, Mark, to think that the Harris campaign could have called for recounts before those deadlines extended, and they didn't. So now we're at the place where the only way, without candidate requested recounts, which is we're way beyond the timeline of that, the only way to really verify the vote is to have lawsuits that demand recounts. And I had Susan Greenhalgh of Free Speech for People on I think it was last week, talking about this with me. And I asked her opinion about the Rockland County lawsuit. And she's like, yeah, it's great, but like, why wouldn't Rockland County just do this on their own? Why wouldn't any state just do this on their own? Where are the secretaries of state? Where are the attorneys general? Why wouldn't they just initiate hand recounts on their own? Why is it taking a lawsuit to do this?
That is a great question. But I think your first point, the one regarding the radioactivity of even asking for a recount because of the 2020 hue and cry that the Republicans raised, Biden's president, but it wasn't a legitimate vote, no legitimacy, et cetera. It made the Democrats so afraid of even mentioning recount. Again, the word just had a radioactivity about it that you understand the damage done. So a legitimate request for recount is viewed as a sort of fanaticism that they don't want to be associated with. The time to ask for those recounts really would have been right after the election. Yeah. Donald Trump ran the table, 7 swing states. I want to see a recount. Again, you have to pay for a recount, but the Democrats had money at that point.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And it was so popular. I mean, we talk about polls, more than 50% of the Democratic base was begging for them. They would have raised that money in a heartbeat. Like I think you said on my show. I mean, this was not a money problem. That was not a legitimate excuse for not doing this. So yeah, now you've got these lawsuits. This is one county where you and I have talked to the statisticians who have been studying the election results as published and see that there are anomalies that just do not mirror organic patterns of voting, where there's a normal distribution for Trump and Harris, and then after a certain amount of votes enters the tabulator, the votes for Trump go way up and the votes for Harris go way down. Something is off. The only way to verify this is by a paper recount. They had what appears to be a very strange anomaly in Rockland County, New York, of all places, which has, by the way, just to play devil's advocate here, I've heard some people say, look, Rockland County is an interesting place because there's a very strong Hasidic community. If you've ever been to Rockland, you know it well. And they vote in blocks. They vote what their rabbi tells them to vote. So maybe if their rabbi told them all not to vote for Kamala Harris, they're all just not going to vote for him. But still, Susan came on my show. She said, people will always give you excuses for why these things occur. And a lot of times the excuses are not legitimate. So just do the recount,
Right. Just do the recount. Great. If it's legit, it's legit. What's the harm?
Yeah.
In a Mark Thompson universe, that rabbi and all of his synagogues and that priest and all of his congregations and those mullahs and all of their congregations, they would all be taxed. I do not understand how you have these pockets of political power. As you say, many of these congregants actually vote exactly as their faith leader tells them to vote. And yet somehow we view them as religious. It's about God, so they get off the hook and they're not taxed. It's amazing to me. It's one of the greatest political power centers in America, and yet it's viewed as utterly without political connection. It's all about the Lord and the divine. And
you've just teased a whole another show, Mark.
Exactly. Yeah, right. That's for another time. Look, so appreciate you stopping through. I love doing your show. I hope you love showing up here because, as you say, this is to be continued, and this is a momentous day. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on what's going on in the House. Appreciate it. Jessica Denson, the Lights On podcast. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped. And please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.